questions. So let's get to our subject. We are looking at Parshas Tavo. So please turn with me to the pasuk in chapter 26, verse 15. It is, if you've got the stone chumash, you'll find it on page 1070. Here, the Torah describes what's called vidui ma'aser, which is the declaration on the part of the householder, the farmer, really, that he has given the tithes and the allocations that are intended for the different categories, for the poor, for the Levi, for those who are in need. He is a, let's say, established landowner. He has the bounty of the crop, and he attests in the Beis Hamikdash that he has allocated it appropriately. And then we have a very beautiful pasuk which concludes this section, and that is verse 15. Kezvav hashkifa mima'on kadshcha min hashamayim. Look down. Here it says, gaze down from your holy abode, from the heavens. Uvareches amcha Yisrael, and bless your people Israel and the land that you've given to us, as you've sworn to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. So the interesting thing, and that's where I'd like to begin tonight, is understanding the meaning of the word hashkifa. Hashkifa is related to the word lahashkif, which is to look or to gaze. Hashkafa, you may have heard that expression, outlook. And this is the first topic I'd like to take up tonight, and that gives rise to the title of our shiur, which is Glimpse, Glance, Gaze. So Rashi, not here, but Rashi in Parshas Vayera, which is the first time we find the word hashkifa, or really it says vayashkifu. Rashi there says that every instance of the word hashkafa in the Torah, in all of the Tanakh, always is associated with a negative evaluation, with a, let's say, a scrutiny that bodes ill. And the example there in Parshas Vayera is the angels who visited Avraham and Sarah. They made their way from there to Sodom, and it says vayashkifu al penei Sodom. They looked down, they gazed down at Sodom. And there Rashi says that every instance of hashkafa is always bad news, with one exception. It's only, the only exception is here, hashkifu mimon kadshcha min hashamayim. It says Rashi, because matnos aniyim, gifts to the poor, providing for those who are in need, transforms the attribute of strict or harsh justice to one of favor and one of compassion. So ha-Kabbalah explains what is the meaning of the word hashkifa, as opposed to two other words which we have, as we have in English as well, multiple words for viewing. So in Hebrew, we also have the word lir'ot, to see, ri'iyah and habata, lir'ot and lahabit. So I just mentioned in English, we have a lot of words for seeing. We have see, look, view, gaze, glance, glimpse, and others as well. And ha-Kabbalah explains the word ri'iyah refers to viewing, which is accurate, but without attention to detail. And it gives a few examples of that, how the word ri'iyah is associated with seeing, but it's like just an initial view without evaluation, without a meticulous assessment of what a person is viewing. Give some examples of that. He saw, and there was a well in the field. And then later on, it says he saw that there were shepherds gathering around it, etc. The word habata lahabit, sometimes it's translated as to stare, but according to our friend for the year, it refers to looking in a particular direction, like to turn to look. And the classic example of this is Lot's wife. It says, Vatabeit ishto me'acharav, that his wife turned around. Look back, Mrs. Lot. You may remember that book by Ephraim Kishon, the famous Israeli humorist. She looked back, she turned around to look. Now, it doesn't say exactly what she saw. It's just a kind of general look. You turn around and you just take a get a glimpse of what there is to observe. It's like a glance, you could say. I'm not sure exactly what the difference between glimpse and glance is in English language, but this how ha-Kabbalah explains. We have Al tabit acharecha, don't look behind. Mehabit el ha-Elohim, it says that Moshe, when he was at the burning bush, he shielded his face because he was afraid. Vayam mehabit el ha-Elohim, to look at God. It means even to turn in that direction, he was afraid to look. So that is Re'iyah and Habata. And he says the proof of how the word Re'eh suggests a more careful view than the word lahabit, which is like to turn to something just to catch a glimpse of it, is a pasuk that says habit yamin ure'eh, like turn to the right and then see, where it says re'eh after lahabit. So lahabit is like when you first turn around to look at a vista or look at a person or look to see what bus has just passed or something like that. You just see it in an instant. Ure'eh means you give it more close attention. What is hashkafa? So this is his beautiful analysis. He says the word hashkafa is associated with what we might call in English to gaze. It means to examine, to scrutinize. It has attention to detail. That's why in modern Hebrew, the word for eyeglasses, which I've worn for many years, is mishkafayim, because mishkafayim allow a person to see with clarity, to see details, to read the small print, or whatever the case may be. So hashkifa refers to looking and to see even the details, to scrutinize. And he says we find this in the Torah, Vayashkef Avimelech ba'ad hachalon. Avimelech gazed through the window, and I'm sure you remember what he saw. He saw Yitzchak and Rivka, who were conducting themselves as a husband and wife. Vayashkef Avimelech, he was looking closely. Ba'ad hachalon nishkafa eim Sisra. It says in the book of Judges that through the window, the mother of Sisra looked. She was scouring the countryside, the horizon. Remember, Sisra was the Canaanite king, general who sought to ravage the Jewish forces, and it was Devorah, the prophetess, who routed him, and as a result, Sisera was not going to return, but his mother was expecting him to come with much booty and spoils of war, captives, and all the rest of it. It says, Vayashkef Ba'an hachalon nishkafa eim Sisera, because she was scrutinizing, looking closely for signs of her victorious son returning from war, which was not to happen. He says also, hashkifa is associated with looking from above to below, looking from a high vantage point at that which is beneath you. And also the one who sees, the one who gazes can see, but the one who is being observed and scrutinized cannot see, does not see the one who's looking at him. So the word hashkifa is associated with that particular form of scrutiny. And that's why he says that Rashi tells us in Vayera that the word hashkifa is always associated with, like we said, a negative, exacting, judgmental scrutiny, because when you look at something very closely, you'll always find something defective. When you analyze in absolute detail with a magnifying glass, you're sure to find something which is defective in some way, except matnos aniyim. When it comes to tzedakah, when it comes to charity, especially our farmer is declaring that he's given everything in accordance with the law. So then he can say, Hashkifim amon kadshecha min hashamayim, look down from your heavenly vantage point and bless the children of Israel, because we have acted in accordance with the requirement. We've given generously, we've given unstintingly, we have given for the benefit, for the needs of those who are impoverished, and therefore we are worthy of your blessing. So may it be for us. So this is how ha-Kabbalah explains Re'iyah, Habata, and Hashkafa, Hashkifa mimon kadshecha min hashamayim. Okay, I found that very interesting when I read his analysis, and it's also a classic example of his style in which he illuminates, he clarifies the meaning of words which are similar to one another, and explains how they are different and how they are used precisely, and how the Torah's usage of the words conforms so perfectly to the intent and to the meaning according to the circumstances. Now, later on in the Parasha, if you look with me, not much further actually, but chapter 27, verse 2, the beginning of chapter 27, that's actually just one page on, if you've got the same Chumash as me, page 1072. So there, it says as follows, keep the commandment that I'm giving you today. Saying Lach, it shall be on the day when you cross the Jordan and you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving. You shall establish for yourselves, set up large stones or boulders, and coat them with lime or plaster that will make it possible to write on them. So they've got to find large stones, and they're going to use those stones not for building, but as a billboard, you might even say, to write upon it. Now, what are they going to write? Now, here's the amazing thing. V'chasavta aleihem, in the next verse, v'chasavta, pasuk gimel, v'chasavta aleihem is kol divrei haTorah hazos, all of the words of this Torah. So this is very problematic, and I have to say that I know I often tell you that until ha-Kabbalah drew my attention to a certain nuance or observation, I had read it many times without noticing it. On this occasion, I did notice it. I mean, it jumps off the page. Is it feasible? Is it even plausible to write the entire Torah on these enormous stones? How large could they be? Is it practical? So Ramban says, well, maybe they were very large. It says Gedolos, maybe they were huge. But even if you got the white cliffs of Dover, is it practical to write the entire Torah on those rocks? Or says Ramban, maybe it was Maaseh Nisi, maybe it was something miraculous, it was microscript, or some example like that, and it was therefore possible to write the entire Torah. Even that, I mean, how did they read it? Did they make use of a microscope to read it? And what was the purpose of writing it like that? So Ibn Ezra, who is the rationalist, quotes the Gaon, probably means Sadia Gaon, and he says it refers to like the Azharos. That the word Azharos, meaning warning, is a term for a kind of poetic composition that comprises a list of the 613 commandments, just as the Rambam has a list, a famous list, and others as well. So before the Rambam, we have the Halachos Gedolos, which is Rabbi Yehuda Karaya. We don't know that much about him, but he lived in the 10th century in Egypt. And even before, around the same time as him, actually, we have Sadia Gaon, who also did the same. And these books have come down to us. They're available. And it is a kind of condensation of the 613 commandments, an enumeration of them. It's written in poetic form, very beautiful, very eloquent, also a bit, in some cases, abstruse. So that's what Ibn Ezra suggests. It means not the entire narrative of the whole Torah from in the beginning God created until the end of the Torah before the eyes of all Israel. It doesn't mean the 5 books of the Torah. It means this or a similar compilation of the Taryag mitzvahs. But, you know, even that goes on for quite a few pages. If you consider that if even each mitzvah is just, referred to in a single verse or even a single stanza, still is quite a lot. So ve-ha-Kabbalah suggests that another proposal that he advances, maybe the reference is when it says kol divrei es, the pasuk here says kol divrei haTorah hazos, maybe haTorah hazos is a reference to the previous chapter, verses 16 to 19, meaning that is to say the immediate previous paragraph. So if you look at your Chumash, if you turn back, if you just look back to the previous 2 verses, maybe it's just that one paragraph, Hayom Hazeh, etc., because there we do have a reference, Lishmor Kol Mitzvosav. It says Lishmor Kol Mitzvosav, to keep all of his commandments. Where does it say that? Yeah, at the end of verse 18, at the end of Pasuk Yud Ches, it says, "V'lishmor kol mitzvosav." So it could be that where the Torah says immediately after that short paragraph, where we're looking at now, there's a reference to kol divrei haTorah. So perhaps it just refers to the previous short passage of 3 or 4 verses, and that's the extent of it. That, of course, is possible to inscribe those few psukim on stone, or to write it. If you cover it with plaster, then you can write it even with a pen and quill or something like that. Okay, that is, a realistic, a rational approach. The difficulty is, what's the great importance of that group of verses? I'm sure if we look through it, we could speculate as to why it's significant, but prima facie, if the Torah says kol haTorah hazos, kol divrei haTorah hazos, difficult to understand how that short, not especially consequential passage would be the focus of that commandment. So ha-Kabbalah, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg here quotes his son, and I think his son is called Shmuel. Not clear to me whether his son was a rabbi or perhaps not, but he quotes his son, and his son has a good suggestion. He says, when it says kol divrei, when the Torah here says, when the Torah says, v'chasavtes kol divrei haTorah hazos, the word kol, all, it could be that it refers to the word klal. Klal means a generalization, like a headline or a principle of the Torah. Kol divrei, it could be that what the Torah means is you shall write the essential teachings of the Torah. And he suggests what it might be. Perhaps it refers to the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. The 3 paragraphs of the Shema, this is a Torah commandment which we fulfill. It's obligatory for a man. I'm sure it's laudatory for a woman, but it's a mitzvah that a man performs twice a day to recite Shema in the morning and in the evening. And men or women, we all recognize the importance of the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. It refers to the oneness of God, the love of God, ve-ha-Kabbalah Hashem Elokecha, schar va'onesh it shall be v'hayam shamoa. If you keep the commandments, then you will enjoy the benefits that will follow from it. Schar va'onesh, reward and punishment. You've got in the 3rd paragraph the reference to tzitzis. It says kol mitzvosai, if you keep all the commandments of the Torah. So he suggests maybe the reference is to a passage, or here 3 specific passages which comprise collectively the mitzvah of reciting the Shema, and there you have an encapsulation of the essence of the Torah. Has another suggestion as well, which is even a lot shorter. Maybe the first 2 of the 10 commandments, belief in God and the refutation, the denial of polytheism. There is one God, and there's a denial of all other gods. That is the essence of the Torah. That is the fundamental basis of the Torah. So perhaps that is a reference. And then he, the author of ha-Kabbalah, proceeds to substantiate his son's suggestion, because later on in the Torah, even though we're near the end of the Torah already, but we're going to find in Parashas Vayelech the portion of ha-Ketav. ha-Ketav is the mitzvah, it's the 612th mitzvah in the Torah, the mitzvah of gathering together the whole nation every 7 years. It's actually Sukkot time in the year following the Shemitah year. And the king reads, it says the Torah, kol haTorah, but it doesn't, tikras haTorah hazos. But the Mishnah explains that even though the Torah uses those words, tikra es haTorah hazos, read this law, it does not mean the entirety of the Torah. It refers to certain passages in the book of Dvarim, certain selections from the book of Dvarim. And so it could well be that here too, even though the Torah says kol haTorah, ksaftem, again, ksaftes kol divrei haTorah, it means chlal divrei Torah. And if you add something further as well, I hope you can follow the logic here. Why the idea of writing the entire Torah, in addition to the practical quandary, even if it's done in a miraculous way, which baffles us, in addition to that, it says that the Torah was actually translated into 70 languages. Excuse me, that these stones had the Torah translated into 70 languages. Now, again, whether it means that literally or something else, what need would there be to render the entire Torah into 70 languages? The nations of the world do not have, let's say, it's not incumbent upon them to keep the Torah in its entirety, or even for that matter, to be aware of the Torah. It is true that over the centuries, the Torah has had an enormous impact on mankind, and no doubt that is part of the divine plan. I think that is certainly clear. But at this early stage in Jewish history, would there have been some purpose to rendering? I'm sure there would be a purpose, but let's think logically. It's difficult to understand what the purpose could be to render the entire Torah into 70 languages for the benefit of 70 foreign cultures. But according to his suggestion, that it means the essence of the Torah. So here we have principles which are relevant to all mankind: belief in God, refutation of idolatry, polytheism, or according to his other suggestion, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. There you have the essential teachings of the Torah: the oneness of God, the love of God, reward and punishment, the commandments of the Torah. Even if we just speak about the 7 Noahide laws. So there is schar va'onesh, reward and punishment, that is very relevant to them as well. So according to this suggestion, at the level of logic, we can appreciate firstly how it was achievable, because we're talking here about only a certain number of verses rather than 5 entire books. But also we can appreciate the benefit of it, not only for the Jewish people, but for the rest of the nations of the world as well. Okay, this is a suggestion that in which the word kol, in order to give it a more rationalistic interpretation, is rendered as klal, as I say, the headlines of the Torah, or the essence of the Torah that can be distilled into, in some cases, a few psukim. Finally, he asks a question which I had thought of, perhaps you've thought of it as well, but of course he formulates it in a much more compelling way. So if you look with me a little bit further, in Pasuk Yud Daled, verse 14, in the same chapter, if you're with me in the Stone Chumash, it's page 1074. So Pasuk Yud Daled, Va'anu ha-Levi'im va'amru. The Leviim responded and they said, El kol ish Yisrael, to all of the men of Israel, Kol Ram. Now, Kol Ram is rendered here by the Art Scroll in a loud voice, Kol Ram. You may know that in modern Hebrew, a Ram Kol is a loudspeaker, an amplifier. That's Ram Kol. Kol Ram. Ram really means high, like Ram Venisa, Romamut. Ram means high. Givat Ram. But Kol Ram in a high voice, in a loud voice. Fine. Doesn't mean high like in the octaves. It means high in the sense of loud. Which I certainly was kind of conscious that it's a term which has given rise to the modern Hebrew Ram Kol. It's not such a common term though, Kol Ram, because, and here's where ha-Kabbalah goes a lot further than Rashi Simon, he says that it says in Tanakh 20 times Kol Gadol. Kol Gadol, he says approximately 20 times. We find in Tanakh Kol Gadol. Kol Ram, we find only once. Why does it say here Kol Ram? And in so many other places it says Kol Gadol, in a great voice. Kol Gadol, V'lo Yasaf, it says by Matan Torah. Kol Gadol we have 20 times. Kol Ram only once. So he explains that Gadol, large or great or sort of substantive, is used for something which is tall as well as something which is wide. So, a flood, a great flood, doesn't extend so much to the height, but to the extent of the horizontal. So if the Mississippi River floods, then you can, it extends, it bursts its banks, and can be swamp, farmland for acres and acres, miles around. Many years ago, our family was in the United States, or I think we flew to the United States or across the USA. And I remember looking down, it was in a summer when they had terrible flooding in the much of the United States. And I remember looking down at the Mississippi River, and it was enormous because it was spreading for miles on each side. So that's the nature of gadol, but it can be tall as well. You can have a mountain, which is a great mountain, a building, which is a great building. A person who is gadol can be horizontal or vertical. Ram means only vertical. Ram is tall. It doesn't mean wide. It only means tall. So kol gadol, kol ram actually doesn't really make that much sense, because especially in this instance, or generally, a voice or a noise which is heard, one doesn't hear it in a vertical sense of greatness. One experiences it, if it's a loud noise, you can hear it from 100 paces or 100 meters or a mile or however far it may be, and even a lot more depending on kol gadol. So he says, why does the Torah here say kol ram? So as we've seen, the word ram, tall, doesn't really fit that well so much for the idea of kol, of the voice. So he says the following. The word kol here doesn't just mean the sound or the noise or the voice. It refers to the content. And we have a famous example of this where it says, Hashem says to Avram about Sarah, Shema bekolah, listen to her voice. Rashi says to the kol nevuah, to the voice of prophecy. It doesn't just mean to hear, like you say, a person has a melodious voice, has a loud voice, has a strong voice, has a soft voice, has a certain accent. That's the kol. That's the sound or the voice. But it means not only that, it also means the content. When it says here, kol ram, it means what they had to say was exalted. The word ram means romamus hama'ala v'chashivus. It's the loftiness, it's the exaltedness of what they had to say. And he says that the halacha states that this declaration on the part of the Levium that the Torah lays out in the following verses must be recited in Hebrew. Now, I'm sure it's true that that was natural for them. Well, having said that, they were not that far, that long out of Egypt. So perhaps Egypt was still their natural mother tongue, even though it was maybe the next generation. But even so, they may have been the younger people who were before the age of 20 initially, and therefore they still survive. But my point is that the halacha is that this must be said in Hebrew, and certain other passages also must be said specifically in the Hebrew language. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah that the Hebrew language, the Lashon HaKodesh, is called a kol ram, an exalted language, because it has such depth, such, excuse the pun, it has the profundity, it has the nuance, it has the, even like Roshe Tavos and Gematria and Sirufim. It is a holy language. It's the language in which the world was created, language of the Torah. So when it says kol ram, it means that the language itself is exalted. Furthermore, it says, Va'anu haLevim va'amru. Va'anu is a notable expression, because usually la'anot means to respond, to reply. But he shows, ve-ha-Kabbalah shows how the word aniyah, to respond, does not only mean like that, to reply, but because very often, like here, it's not at all clear what they're responding to. They're not in a dialogue or a conversation. Va'anu haLevim va'amru. The Levium, it says here in the art scroll, the Levium shall speak up and say, because they're not replying really. So ve-ha-Kabbalah explains that the word la'anot, anu va'amru, relates to the word, it's a concept of gilui, of pronouncing, exposing, publicizing, revealing something. He says the word oneh is related to the word ayin. Ayin means eye. Like we find ha-Kedesha hi ba'inayim, where Yehuda was asking, what happened to the harlot who was here on the crossroads? Because she positions herself in a public space. If you remember last week, we said the word Kedesha is a woman, harlot who plies her trade openly. She touts for business in the public square. Ha-Kedeshahi ba'einayim. So, or he says, Va'an sabi tzidkasi. Yaakov said, my righteousness will speak up on my behalf. So he says that aniyah v'ya'anu, here it says va'anu haleviim, it's related to the word ayin, something which is visible, something which is like in the open, even something which is public, because they are saying something which is subject to scrutiny, subject to analysis. Like we say, he even explains, Ya'ancha Hashem b'yom tzara, may God answer you on your day of distress. Ya'ancha, it doesn't mean there that God is replying necessarily, but rather the person seeks that Hashem will be attentive towards him, will take an interest in him, will take notice of his tzara, of his distress. Ya'ancha Hashem b'yom tzara, it doesn't just mean God will answer you or reply to you. It means God will note, will be attentive to your distress. Ya'ancha Hashem b'yom tzara. So it will be Hashem will be attentive to you in your time of need. It's as if we say God will place his eye upon you. And similarly, we say anu va'amru, the people responded with the awareness of concentration and intent. So to summarize, we've seen tonight hashkifa means to gaze with care and with scrutiny, and that's why most of the time it's associated with a judgmental experience, which has frequently unpleasant implications. But here, when it comes to matnos aniyim, so then the more one scrutinizes, the more beneficence there is. Then we said, chasavta al ha'avanim es kol divrei haTorah hazos. So we suggested it means klal divrei haTorah hazos, the essence of the Torah. And finally, kol ram, even though in modern Hebrew a ram kol is a loudspeaker, but really, according to this analysis, when it says they speak kol ram, they spoke with exalted language. Their message was exalted, and that is what they had to say. So thank you to everyone. I wish you good Shabbat.